Okay, we'll get started. I have about 35 slides we need to get through because these slides are on the midterm. So the midterm will cover all the material up to today. I also have that DVD I wanted to show you last week, but we had the polygraph demo. So I'll give you the quiz results today for those of you who did quiz 1. I'll show you that DVD. And it provides a really good summary of the research in terms of police lineups and the differences between simultaneous and sequential lineups. We will talk about the development of a new lineup here at Carleton that Joanna Puzzulo developed with Rod Lindsay called the elimination lineup. So this is what the type of lineup you use with a child versus an adult. Then we'll move to talking about child witnesses and child abuse. Certainly there's a lot of other information covered in the chapter that I'm not going to have time to cover now. Okay, so those of you who wrote the quiz, and not all of you wrote the quiz, so about 85 of you did not write the quiz. So I'm not sure why you decided not to write the quiz, but that's up to you. The range was not so good. I mean, the upper range was excellent. But the lower range, 5 to 20. So there's 20 items on the quiz. Some people didn't do as well as they hoped to. Many of you did extremely well. So 40% of those who wrote got in the A range. So certainly that's outstanding. So if you got 16 or above on the quiz, you can congratulate yourself. That's good, because that means you've done really well on chapters 1 to 4. Right? So you have to just go through chapters 5 and 6, review chapters 1 and 4 for the midterm. Okay? And then you can see the breakdown for the rest of the marks. So if you did not so you've read the chapters, you've watched the lectures, or you've come to the lectures, you've gone through all the questions in the study guide, and you still didn't do as well as you hoped to. Okay? So, I mean, some of you obviously did, but if you're the ones, maybe you got the C's or D's or didn't do as well, we're going to hold 2 review sessions this week. So there'll be a group review session that Heather's going to run tomorrow from 9 to 10:30 in the Loeb building, which is just next door here. That's the brick building next door. So she's in Loeb D 780. There's A, B, C, D in the Loeb building, different sections of the Loeb building, and it's on the 7th floor. She will go through all 30 quiz questions. Now you say 30, you only had 20. So each of you got a random sample of 20 of the 30 questions. So for those of you who might have been thinking of cheating, none of you here, I'm sure, and just emailing your responses, 1A, 2E, 3D, it wouldn't have worked very well, right? Because your colleague would have got potentially different questions. So she'll be going through all 30 of those questions. I will tell you now that some of those same questions will be on the midterm. So this would be in your best interest to try and get there. There'll be an individual review if you don't want to be with other people when you review your quiz. That's fine as well. So Julie, the other TA, will hold an individual review session on Friday from 1 to 3. So she can call up your quiz, and she'll go individually through each of your answers. Okay? Now, I realize that some of you cannot come to campus. We have people living in Winnipeg. We've got some distance people living in Vancouver and Halifax and out of the country. It's certainly not expected. So on Friday afternoon, I will release the quiz answers so that you can go in, and I'll send you an email to tell you how to do this. So you will be able to go in, see your answers, just the 20, not all 30, but you see your 20 answers and see what you answered and then what is the correct answer. Okay, for those of you who can't make it to campus. Does that make sense? Okay? No, you don't have to let me know. I'm going to release it to everyone. All 365 or 70 of you. On Friday afternoon, the 80 who didn't do the quiz, they're out of luck. But certainly if you did the quiz, you'll be able to get your answers that way. But if you want to know all 30 answers, right, there's 30 questions on the quiz, then you need to come to the review sessions. Yes? Well, no, I'm just, because the way it works is it's tied to your, right? I don't think that's the way WebCT works. Yeah, I don't know. Look, I'm lost as well. I found out today or yesterday that I could do this for you, and so I'm going to go ahead and do it. Okay, any other? Yeah. How many questions are on the midterm? How many questions are on the midterm? Okay, so the midterm will consist of chapters 1. We'll cover chapters 1 to 6, lectures 1 to 9, including this lecture today. Okay, so chapters 1 to 6 in the textbook. We're covering chapter 6 today. All the lectures, including the guest lectures, and I've had the TAs watch the guest lecture and develop 3 questions directly from the guest, you know, the profiling lecture that Natalie gave and the polygraph lecture that Ian gave. Right directly from their guest lectures. It will consist of 70, here's your answer, 70 multiple choice questions. You'll have 3 hours. It's already scheduled on Saturday, October 24th. Now again, remember, this is not my choice. When you have a CUTV courses, they either pick Friday night or Saturday. So I did not choose Saturday morning to be here, but I certainly will be here with you on Saturday morning on the 24th. There will be a TA review session as well before the midterm next Tuesday on the 20th from 9 to 11, also in Loeb D780. So I think this is Heather doing this, but she knows all 70 questions. So, I'm not sure how she's going to run this review session, but she's very familiar with what 70 questions are on the quiz, on the midterm. So she will be providing a review. Okay, any questions about the quiz, midterm? Yes? What if you have class on a Tuesday? Well, then you have your friend there. Okay, well then you're going to get on the discussion group and say, for a measly $20, I'll send you to the quiz. Only kidding. Maybe you can get on the discussion group and see who's able to go. What I can do, maybe next Wednesday. Next Wednesday we're covering Chapter 7, Juries and Jury Decision Making. That's a whole chapter. It's one chapter for 2 classes. So what I will attempt to do is perhaps on Wednesday take the latter half of the class to do a mini review. Do that, because everyone then can get access to it. And that will be a few days prior to the midterm. Okay, does that help out? Okay, any other questions? Tonight, the assignment, what is it, 3's due, 4? I can't keep track. The assignment is due, and Assignment 3, and I'll download that assignment. This will be the first assignment that I'll report back on you what you said in the assignment. So from now on, I'm going to incorporate what you say in the assignment, and I'll incorporate that into lecture. Okay, everything's still... Okay, what we're going to do now is, now there is a question on the quiz about this DVD as well. So this DVD is called Unreliable Evidence. It profiles the work of Rod Lindsay, and we'll see if it will work. And we will DVD, and we'll hit play.
Tonight on Disclosure.
Fact remains, I am not a murderer. I did not kill Perry.
Convicted by a hair. Did faulty forensics put this man behind bars?
Clearly was necessary to support the evidence of people who were admitted liars.
Nobody's ever sat down with members of the jury to say, did you believe this person or that person? We'll never know.
And later.
You're Rod Lindsay?
Yeah.
You've just witnessed a murder. Could you identify the shooter?
People have this idea that when you're in a situation like that, the attacker's face is just burned into your memory.
Witnesses sometimes get it right, witnesses sometimes get it wrong.
I think that's him.
Then we put you to the test. Who would you convict?
I don't know, maybe.
Good evening, I'm Diana Swain. Welcome to a special edition of Disclosure, all about unreliable evidence. Things like eyewitness testimony and forensic analysis. Things that on the surface seem irrefutable, but it turns out they can be dead wrong. How does that happen? Well, later in the program you can judge for yourself, because you'll witness a crime and be asked to identify the assailant. But we start with a man who just got a new lease on life. His name is Jim Driscoll, a convicted killer without much hope until a few days ago, when the Federal Justice Department hinted his case could be reopened over some unreliable evidence. We've been looking into his story for months and have come across some astonishing facts, hidden from public view for more than a decade. It's not too much to say that Jim Driscoll was convicted by a hair. In the laboratory, clues undetected by the naked eye can be revealed. And it's where police went to uncover what happened that June night 13 years ago. Police say the killer fired several shots. He and an accomplice loaded the body into the back of a van and drove to an isolated spot outside Winnipeg. They dug a shallow grave and buried 30-year-old Perry Harder. Three and a half months later, someone on a passing train spotted Harder's body. In no time, police had a suspect. His name was Jim Driscoll. Driscoll had spent most of his life on Winnipeg's tough Main Street. He didn't have much of a criminal record, but virtually everyone around him did.
There's always been somebody around that had a rap sheet. It's something I grew up with, which is probably one of the reasons why I didn't have a problem with anybody coming around that did have a rap sheet.
Perry Harder was one of those people, a small-time thief with a habit of getting caught. Driscoll ran a machine shop out of this garage and agreed to let Harder store some things there. Most of it turned out to be stolen. After police raided the garage, they arrested both men. Weeks later, Harder was murdered. Police say Driscoll did it to keep Harder from implicating him in the thefts.
I've never said I was an angel. I've done things in my life. Yeah, I've done things, but the fact remains I am not a murderer. I did not kill Perry.
At trial, the Crown's case was thin, the credibility of the witnesses even thinner. One of them, Ray Zanadine, a man with a lengthy criminal record, claimed Driscoll confessed. Greg Brodsky was Driscoll's lawyer. How would you characterize the witnesses?
Crooks and thieves and liars and people who are getting ahead at the expense of others.
Now, a layperson would say that should be a perfect scenario for you as a defense lawyer to bust their credibility in 5 minutes.
Oh, sure, it would be, except that the Crown had in this case something that went beyond the credibility of people who lacked credibility. They had physical evidence that was hard to refute.
It was the only physical evidence that linked Driscoll to the victim, and it was found in the back of Driscoll's van. Caught in the carpet, police found 3 hairs they believed came from Perry Harder. Those hairs were scrutinized under a microscope. alongside hairs taken from Harder's body. An RCMP expert in hair comparison noted any similarities. If there were more than 20, the hairs could be called a match. At trial, he told the jury that in his judgment, they did match. One of the people on that jury was Marie Jupp.
During the trial, do you remember when the forensic examiner took the stand and talked about the hair evidence?
Well, it was a policeman, wasn't it, who took the stand then and was giving his report. And they were pretty sure that they were Mr. Harder's hairs in Mr. Driscoll's truck.
Marie Jupp and the others voted to convict, and Jim Driscoll started serving a life sentence.
It's just totally devastating. You know, it's like you get hit in the head with a brick, and you know, you don't know what happened. You can't understand it.
That's because Jim Driscoll insisted to anyone who would listen that Perry Harder had never been in his van. The hair evidence must be wrong. But how could that be? The science of hair comparison had been used in thousands of criminal cases all over North America for decades. And the practice gets much of its credibility from this man. Barry Gaudette was a forensic examiner for the RCMP in the 1970s. He tested the accuracy of hair comparison and concluded it was so reliable it would likely only be wrong 1 in 4,500 times. It became the courtroom science of choice.
99.99% of the time the examiners get it right. That's what he was saying effectively.
Clive Stafford Smith is a lawyer in Louisiana. He says because of Gaudette's work, jurors rarely doubt the results.
What can you tell me about how influential the Canadian study has been in validating the comparative hair analysis in cases?
Oh, I've been in cases where the experts, the technologists, get up there and say, oh yes, I'm relying on this study by this Canadian chap called Gaudette, which tells me that the probability of a false match is 1 in 4,500.
But the New Orleans lawyer was about to discover a critical flaw in that study. In 1994, Stafford Smith was handling a death row case, one that hinged on hair.
The hair analysis was most of the case. It was almost everything. So I thought, wow, we'd better really take a look at this and see what it means.
So Stafford Smith, a scholar in science as well as law, began a search for published research.
Quite frankly, I was surprised. I expected to find scientific studies that would give me a real error rate. I expected to find scientific validation, and there was nothing there. Go down to... here we go. This is the case where Barry Gaudette's...
in fact, the only study he could find was that decades-old paper by Barry Gaudette.
I wanted to do what all scientists do, which is I wanted to take Barry Gaudette's original data, look at that original data, look at all of his assumptions and see if they were valid.
Stafford Smith took the data from Gaudette's report and with the help of a data analyst at Columbia University, reran the test. Stafford Smith's results, published in the prestigious Columbia Law Review, concluded Gaudette's 1 in 4,500 finding was so seriously flawed it amounted to modern-day snake oil.
On one of his figures, I got it to 1 in 2, that the probability of a false match was 1 in 2.
1 in 2 would mean hair analysis amounted to little more than a guess. How could the two men conclude something so different with the same data? Stafford Smith says the tests in Gaudette's study simply weren't rigorous enough. He rarely got it wrong, making the science seem more reliable than it is, with disastrous consequences.
Forensic hair analysis is responsible for many, many people sitting in a very small cell right now as we sit here who are crying at night because they didn't do the crime for which they're locked up. I'm absolutely convinced of that, and I can name some individuals. And that's a crime against humanity.
At least 4 American states are taking a closer look because DNA testing has revealed forensic examiners with a terrifying track record. Consider Joyce Gilchrist in Oklahoma. She worked on more than 3,000 cases, but DNA testing has revealed she was wrong in several of them. Now the state is reviewing every file she's ever worked on.
Citizens of the state of Montana, let me offer our apologies. Defendant is released forthwith.
In the past decade, more than 20 people in the U.S. convicted on the strength of hair analysis have been set free. Toward the end of his career, Gaudette himself argued for the use of DNA over hair analysis. For years, Jim Driscoll has demanded the hair used against him be retested. Finally, last spring, the Manitoba government agreed to have it done. Not like this, which relies on human judgment. Like this, with DNA, which relies on chemistry. You can just imagine what those tests revealed. The hairs found in the back of Jim Driscoll's van didn't come from Perry Harder at all. In fact, DNA revealed those hairs didn't even match each other. They'd come from 3 different people. Bruce McFarlane is Manitoba's Deputy Justice Minister and was one of the first to see the DNA results.
We found that the results were unsettling. There's no question about that. We had a number of senior Crown attorneys take a look at that part of the case, evaluating it in the context of the whole trial.
That is, the same office that had prosecuted Driscoll at trial was now asked to decide how crucial the hair had been to its case. It concluded the evidence had never been that important. There was no need for a new trial. But it feels like a big escape hatch, because you could quite conveniently say, it didn't play a big enough role.
If you have, quite apart from the hair evidence, if you have an overwhelming case against an individual, the natural conclusion would be, well, yeah, that was wrong evidence, but there's so much other evidence that the jury would probably have come to, almost inevitably have come to the same conclusions.
In a recent interview with Disclosure, the chief of the Winnipeg Police Service was similarly unmoved. You say that when you learned the results of the DNA, your conclusion was it wouldn't have made a difference. It wasn't that key in your view.
In my view, that's correct.
How can you conclude that it didn't matter?
Well, I think we have to put that piece of evidence, as you describe as a key piece of evidence, into context with the entire case. I'm familiar with the entire case, the entire investigation of all the evidence that was gathered during the investigation itself, and the evidence that was entered into trial. And at the end of the day, though, let's remember, it was the jury that believed them. And they were warned to ensure that they put the proper weight on that type of evidence. We'll never know, because nobody's ever sat down with members of the jury to say, did you believe this person or that person? We'll never know.
Actually, we have a pretty good idea. Under Canadian law, jurors can't talk about their deliberations, but they can talk about new evidence, and Marie Jupp agreed to talk to us. Do you think it would have been important for you to have known at the time that it wasn't Perry Harder's hair at all?
Well, I think it would have helped us, yes.
In your view, was that important evidence at the time?
Yes. Since finding out that with DNA that it wasn't his, only 3 other people's, well, that was, to me, that's very important.
And what do you think should happen now?
I hope that he gets a chance of another trial anyway.
And now he just might. Late last week, the Federal Justice Department announced a full investigation into his case and agreed there may have been a miscarriage of justice.
I have been away from my family for 13 plus years. It has built my hopes. There is a light at the end of the tunnel now.
With no one who claims to have witnessed the crime and the hair evidence now proven to be wrong, it leaves the events of that night to the word of a police informant. Remember Ray Zanadine? He was the Crown's star witness, and it turns out he struck quite a deal with police in return for his testimony. It's all here in this 175-page report written by police 10 years ago, and they've worked hard to keep it secret. It's only out now because Disclosure and the Winnipeg Free Press asked the courts to unseal it. And earlier this week, after reading its explosive contents, a Manitoba judge agreed. It shows that following his testimony, Ray Zanadine was allowed to walk away from an arson he'd admitted to, and he was paid thousands of dollars for his expenses. including a $20,000 lump sum after he threatened to change his story. And who helped write that report all those years ago? The man who's now the chief in Winnipeg, Jack Iwatsky. Did you ever have misgivings about the amount of money spent looking after Mr. Zanedine?
Misgivings? I don't understand misgivings.
I'm asking you, are you comfortable with it?
But what I'm saying is you're asking me to comment on the appropriateness of that.
Yes.
There has been a lot of debate relative to how we handle informants, how we do our business as police officers. There are certain guidelines that are in place, and we follow those guidelines.
But the jury didn't know, even at that point, what was available to know, which is the amount of money being spent hand-holding Mr. Zanedine.
They were warned, they were charged by the judge to consider all the evidence based on how credible it is and whether or not it could be corroborated.
The deal with Ray Zanedine wasn't only kept from the jury, it was kept from Driscoll's lawyer, even though he was required to know by law.
I always knew that it was a tainted verdict. The confession sealed it. They needed to buy it. And sometimes, with these fellows, you have to pay an awful lot in order to get them to tell a big enough lie.
Chief Iwatsky has known about the deal all these years, but insists it was never his job to tell Driscoll's lawyers what he knew. If he is successful in getting another trial, if he's acquitted, do you wear the stain of having insisted all these years that he was the guy?
I stand by the review that I was part of in 1993 and the conclusions that we came to. And I stand by the fact that as of today, there is nothing that has been brought to my attention that would suggest that he was not involved in this. That has not changed our mind. Am I going to wear this at the end of the day? I don't know. I'm the leader of this organization, and I guess if the police service is going to wear anything, any criticism, I'm the person who's going to be up front to take that criticism.
The lights of Winnipeg out here are probably one of the biggest problems for me because during the evenings you walk around the track, you can see the glow over top of Winnipeg, and you can see all the lighting from one end of the city to the other.
Tomorrow, Jim Driscoll will argue there's now so much doubt about his guilt that he should be given bail. For him, freedom has never seemed closer or further away.
I've been asked on many occasions, does it bother you? Yes, it does bother me. Have you ever thought of running? No, I have never thought of running. Simply because there is going to be a day where I will be exonerated, where I will get what I deserve, and that's a new trial, and that's where the exoneration will come, and my kids will all be there, and I'll be able to spend time with them again.
When we come back, Mark Kelly tests your visual memory. Just how good an eyewitness would you be?
Hey, you are listening. We're busy. You have just witnessed a shooting. Now you have to identify the shooter from this photo lineup.
Your typical crime scene, it's a stranger that you didn't expect to be of any importance to you, and by the time you realize it was important, you had other things to think about.
She was a real estate agent showing this house to a man, a prospective buyer. Inside the garage, he snapped, savagely beating her with a 2x4. Then he strangled her with an electric cord and left her for dead. But she survived. From her hospital bed, the victim told police what she remembered about the man who attacked her. He said he was from Ontario and waiting for a military pension. He also said he lived nearby on Trunk Road with his wife and 2 teenage daughters. The police began going door to door until they found a man who fit that profile like a glove. Ken Hibbert, ex-military, newly retired. 2 teenage stepdaughters. He and his wife Deborah had moved west from Ottawa that summer and were living on Trunk Road. He agreed to talk to us on camera, his first ever interview since that fateful day in Duncan.
Did you have any problems with the law in your past?
Oh, no.
Nothing.
Hibbert and his wife were thinking of having a baby and starting a new life.
We were looking for a house we could own, not rent, and exploring the area. It was a very relaxed, second honeymoon almost.
Yeah.
The honeymoon was over. The RCMP came knocking, armed with a detailed description and a sketch of the suspect. 10 years ago, fresh out of the military, Hibbert was a dead ringer. He just didn't know it yet.
They were asking everybody questions. I just went along with the flow.
Again, we didn't think anything of it.
Ken, at what point did you realize that this wasn't just a general interview, that they were...
When they arrested me.
Hibbert was photographed, fingerprinted, and released. But he was now the prime suspect. The next day, an RCMP constable took his picture along with 7 others and went to the hospital to see if Janet McLeod could identify her attacker. This is the police recording of that interview.
Okay, now Janet, you will be viewing a photograph identification lineup card containing 8 photographs numbered 1 to 8.
It was 12 days after the beating, and she was still barely able to speak.
You said you don't know for sure?
Rod Lindsay is an expert on eyewitness identification at Queen's University.
So we know people feel a strong pressure to choose in this situation, and they feel like they've failed if they don't. Especially if they're victims, there's the feeling of safety, that they want this person to be caught and to be known and to be off the streets because it will make them feel more comfortable.
With a little police prompting, she focused on number 7, Ken Hibbert.
Okay, you're pointing to number 7? And what is it about number 7?
There's like a long conversation with her.
Now, if it wasn't on that day, could it have been some other time?
This was not a positive ID, far from it, but she was right about one thing. She had met Ken Hibbert before. His face had triggered her memory.
2 to 3 weeks before she was beaten, we had gone to an open house, and she'd been there, and we'd chatted for about 10 or 12 minutes with her. Mostly me, because I'm chatty.
And she also got a background on the 2 of us.
The same photo lineup was shown to a second eyewitness, a next-door neighbor. She had seen the attacker briefly as he fled. Was it Hibbert? She didn't think so.
Are you satisfied that none of these people are the person?
I don't think they are.
But police continued to build a case against him. 6 weeks later, they returned to his house.
46-year-old Kenneth Royden Hibbert, charged with attempted murder and aggravated assault.
Hibbert, in handcuffs, made the local news. The witness, the next-door neighbor, watched it. So did Janet McLeod. With a policeman at her side, she looked at Hibbert's face on the TV screen and told police they'd got the right man.
As evidence, it's pitifully weak.
Rod Lindsay says seeing Hibbert on TV poisoned the process of identification.
You've now got information that the police are explicitly thinking that this is the individual out of all of the others. You have to connect that back to, well, that was the one that was familiar. And it's a very easy inference for this witness to say, it's got to be the person.
By the time the case came to trial, more than a year later, Janet McLeod was convinced Ken Hibbert was the man who had almost killed her. She pointed him out in court, said she'd looked him in the eyes and begged for her life. The second eyewitness also identified him as the man that she'd seen at the crime scene. Ken Hibbert was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 12 years in prison.
Did you beat that woman? Did you beat Janet McLeod?
No.
Criminal lawyer Peter Firestone appealed Hibbert's case to the Supreme Court of Canada. He argued the eyewitness evidence was hopelessly tainted.
It is dramatic in a courtroom when someone who's been beaten within an inch of her life is asked the question, would you look around the courtroom
and please identify not the person you saw on the television show, but the person who was with you that day. And then she points at Mr. Hibbert and says, that's the man. And I'm sure she believes that's the man, but she's wrong. Witnesses sometimes get it right, witnesses sometimes get it wrong.
Just ask Marvin Anderson.
Sometimes.
Because we do need to get back to this. Okay. So I started the video at the wrong spot. But that was good. It was an interesting case, the hair analysis. But what goes on from that case, they do another case down in the United States in Virginia. And that guy was wrongfully accused as well on the basis of eyewitness testimony. And then what you do see is Rod Lindsay, he's the bigger man from Queen's University, he's giving a lecture like this. And then some guy comes in from a side. Actually, we could do it in this class. But anyway, he's giving a lecture about eyewitness testimony. Some guy comes in, pulls out a handgun, pretends to shoot Rod. He's wearing a white shirt, and he has this little fake blood sac in his hand, and he grabs his chest, and there's this huge red stain. Okay? Then he stops the class and says, okay, you just participated in an eyewitness testimony study. Okay? And then he goes on and talks about eyewitness testimony. Okay? So last week I talked about sequential versus simultaneous lineup. Joanna Puzulu, who works here at Carleton, worked with Rod Lindsay. She's looked at children and compared children in sequential versus simultaneous. Certainly when the target is present, right? Not like what happened to that fellow there. The target is present. Children and adults have the same accuracy. So both kids, 6, 7, 8-year-old kids, your age, 30, 40-year-old people, if the person's there in the lineup, that's not the problem. Okay? The problem is, and it was certainly in that case that you saw, the actual perpetrator was not there. So you have these simultaneous lineups, and what tends to happen is that everyone does a relative judgment, right? They look through those 6 or 8 pictures and said, well, that guy looks mostly like the person who assaulted me. Okay? So it's a relative judgment rather than absolute judgment. And children, right, in that task, even adults have a problem, right? And a lot of the wrongful convicted is based on this false eyewitness testimony. But certainly children, what they do is they even do that more often. Okay, so if you have that simultaneous lineup in front of kids, and this is what Joanna's been doing, they tend to pick someone, which is probably not surprising, right? You tell a 6 or 8-year-old, is the person there? They're probably going to say, oh, my task is to try to find the person. Okay? So what Joanna and Rod Lindsay have done, they've done what's called an elimination lineup. So we have a simultaneous lineup that's used most frequently out in the real world. Rod Lindsay and Gary Wells have suggested we use a sequential lineup, right, where you present photographs one at a time, so people have to use an absolute judgment. And then Rod and Joanna has taken it further, where they've developed what's called elimination lineup. So it's a combination of both of them. So initially, all the pictures are presented at once to the children, and then they do a relative judgment, who looks most like the person in that video you saw. Okay, all of this research for the elimination lineup is experimental lab research. You get kids watch a video of a mock crime or a video of someone spilling something, and then you ask who was the perpetrator, who did that. Then what you do is you then take that selected photograph and ask them to do an absolute judgment. Is this the person? Yes or no? And you certainly remind them that they could make an error. Okay? Now this figure is taken directly from the textbook. It's figure 6.2 in chapter 6. And you can see for the elimination, well no, first look at the simultaneous, so the bars on the left. So you have children in red, you have adults in blue. And the rate of a correct rejection This study involves target absent. Okay, the person is not in the lineup. That's what target absent means. Right? There's target present, there's target absent. And so the rate of correct rejection, saying no, that person is not there. So you see in that those left-hand bar, those two bar graphs, that children are much worse than adults, saying the person is not there when you present all the photographs in front of them. Okay? If you move to what they've developed, this elimination lineup, you see the accuracy rates between children and adults are the same. Okay, so this is what now they're suggesting if you are going to interview a child witness, this is the technique you should be using. Okay, any questions about? Okay, so I'm going to move on, also continuing talking about child eyewitness testimony. Loads and loads of study looking at how much detail do children provide when they're describing a scene. And this is sort of summarizing the research. They are as accurate as you guys would be. Okay, so if you brought your nieces and nephews in and we got them to watch a crime scene or look at a crime photo, they would be just as accurate as you are. It's just that they would provide a lot less detail. Okay, so they wouldn't provide, let's say, 10 or 12 descriptors. They might provide 3 or 4. But those 3 or 4 are just as correct as potentially your 8 or 10. Certainly the research has shown that children are more suggestible than adults. So it's easier, right, to mislead and implant wrong answers in a child than it is in an adult. So they're more susceptible to misleading information. Right? Especially if that misleading information comes from a person in authority. Right? Kids are used to teachers telling them things, parents telling them things. If they're sitting in front of a police officer, they're going to likely believe what the police officer has to say. Okay? Certainly repeating questions is what happens if you keep asking a child the same question. Right? Was it that person who took that? Did your father do this to you? Right? And you keep coming back to it again and again. The child soon realizes the answer they're giving is not what the answer that you want. Right? And so they sort of think, well, I've told you what I remember, or I told you what happened. Clearly that's not what you want to say here. Right? So then they change their answer. Typically in a forensic investigation, children are interviewed on average of 11 times. Right? So if the kids keep coming back and you keep saying, no, that's not what happened. No, that's not what happened. Sooner or later, right, they may well change their answers. In the Martinsville case, this is the Linda and Ron and Travis Sterling case. It's profiled in your book. In that particular case, this daycare owner was charged with sexual abuse of kids in the daycare. Supposedly 9 people were involved, and really bizarre events were involved. One of the kids were interviewed 60 times. Okay? And so you can imagine this poor little, then we're talking about daycares, right? They're 3 to 5 years old, being interviewed 60 times. And certainly that little child's memory and what he said changed over those 60 interviews. Rapport, children are more likely to give misleading or incorrect information to a warm, supportive individual. So there's research looking at how they respond to different individuals. And certainly the formatting of questions matter. If you use yes or no questions, children have a yes bias. Okay, so if you ask yes or no questions, they tend to answer yes, regardless if that's the true answer or not. Okay, in your book it talks about the Sam Stone study. So this is research. Stephen Ceci is sort of an extremely well-known researcher in this area. And the Sam Stone study involved 3 or 4-year-olds versus 5 and 6-year-olds. So what these researchers did, they arranged with a teacher to have a stranger come to the daycare, and all the stranger did was come in, say hello to the teacher, say hello to the class, walk around the periphery of the classroom, and then say goodbye, and he left. That's it. Okay? So that's the control condition. In the stereotype condition, the day before this man came in, the teacher said that Sam Stone is coming to class tomorrow, and Sam Stone came to visit me last night. And Sam Stone is really, really clumsy, and he always breaks things. And Sam Stone took this Barbie, and he broke the Barbie's arm. Okay? Now, Sam Stone doesn't mean to do bad things, and he apologized, and he fixed my Barbie for me. Okay, so this is a stereotype, right? This person is a bad person, this person is a clumsy person. Then they had the suggestion condition. So Sam Stone came to class, and then the kids were interviewed 4 times. And during those 4 interviews across a 10-week period, there was a post-event information provided, and in the suggestion, it wasn't what was provided was Sam Stone picked up that book and ripped out a page. Now, Sam Stone didn't pick up a book, and he certainly didn't rip out a page. And the other misleading information they gave him, Sam Stone picked up that white teddy bear and spilt chocolate on it. Okay? Because, you know, so that was the suggestion condition. Then they had a combined stereotype. Sam Stone's a bad person, he's really clumsy, and the suggestion. Okay? Then at 10 weeks, this is the results. So at 10 weeks, they asked about the teddy bear and the book. Okay, and they had 2 forms of questioning. Initially, there was free narrative. The kid just told you, tell me what happened when Sam Stone came to visit. Or they were given specific questions, what happened to the teddy bear when Sam Stone came to visit? What happened to the book? So for free narrative, right, certainly the control and stereotype, none of the kids came up with this idea that anything happened to the teddy bear book. It would be unusual that they would. Right? There was never mentioned to them. Sam Stone didn't. But remember in the suggestion, there was post-event information provided during previous interviews, and 21% of them said, yes, Sam Stone did something to the teddy bear. And all it was, you know, a suggestion within an interview, and then adding the stereotype that Sam Stone is a clumsy individual jumped it up to 46%. And that's free narrative. And certainly free narrative is what is being suggested that the way you should interview a child. So if you have suggestion and you have stereotyping, you can still get wrong information, is what that red bars are showing. Then if you have a specific question, did Sam Stone spill chocolate on the teddy bear? 10% of the control condition said yes, right? 37% of the stereotype condition said yes. Remember, Sam Stone never did any of this. Suggestion, 53%, and up to 72%. So you can see how easy it is to mislead 3 to 5-year-olds. It's not very difficult. Okay? So certainly you have heard about these, probably about these daycare situations. The Martensville is the biggest one here in Canada, where little kids, they were given misleading information, there were suggestions involved, there were stereotyping involved. It's maybe not surprising that then they start disclosing abuse. Okay, we're going to talk about this 2 studies about whether or not you can implant a false memory. This is a huge debate. Okay, if you have some extra time, just Google false memory. You'll have the advocates on one side saying false memories can't be implanted, versus the advocates on the other side saying yes. So what these studies did, and it was Liz Loftus that did a lot of this research. She's the one that was doing all that post-misinformation effect. So way back a number of years ago, she did the Lost in the Shopping Mall study. Okay? So this would be like you're sitting down for Thanksgiving dinner on Sunday or Monday. Okay? And for some reason, your parents and your siblings decide, oh, we'll play a trick on you. We're going to tell you that you were lost in a shopping mall when you're 5 years old. Okay? And you can say, you know, they'll make up stories about it was this, you know, it was Rideau Mall, it was in the afternoon, Mom had gone shopping in this particular store, you had wandered away, we lost you for an hour, we couldn't find you, we called security. Okay, so you get all this information, and it's coming from a reliable source, right? How many of you would actually believe you got lost in a shopping mall? Yeah, I would. You know, my parents said I'm at 5 years old. It's a long time ago. I don't know. I'd probably believe them. It's plausible that I might wander off, right? Anyway, so this is what Loftus did. She actually phoned the parents and said, "Tell me three true stories about what happened to your son or daughter." These were university students. Your son or daughter, and did they ever get lost in a shopping mall? She made sure they didn't, and that was what the story she tried to implant. So there's 3 true stories and 1 false story. And she checked with the parents to make sure it was false. And about 20 some odd % actually believed, right, that they got lost. And they started confabulating. They said, oh, I remember exactly. I was so upset. I remember that grandmother figure who came and got me, took me to the security office, and then my parents came, and my mom was so upset, and my brother was upset. So they actually just completely fell for it. Now, certainly people have criticized this study, saying, well, what has it to do with child abuse or sexual abuse, right? Sure, you may be able to implant a memory about some event when someone's 5 years old. That's pretty plausible. So there's many studies that try to replicate Loftus's finding, and Pezdek has also tried to replicate. And what he did, he actually got the parents involved. So he phoned the students' parents and said, I want you to try and implant one of 2 memories. One memory is just like before, being lost in a shopping mall. Okay, so this is from a trusted source, a reliable source. They didn't realize their parents were part of the deception. Okay, and then something a little less plausible, which has much more higher emotional arousal, right? And again, in the study they said, remember a time when you ate too much junk food and you got constipated and we had to take you to your doctor and your doctor had to give you an enema? And that's the story they tried to implant. It didn't work. 0% of the students fell for that. So this simply was not as plausible as getting lost in a shopping mall. Okay? So are some experiences so horrific that the human brain seals them away only to recall later? This is the recovered memory debate, right? That you have a horrifying, traumatic experience, highly emotionally arousing. Typically, these events are surrounding the issue of sexual abuse, that you repress this memory. Okay, and this repression idea comes from Sigmund Freud. Right? He believed many of his patients had repressed traumatic events, and that's why they had all these symptoms as adults, and he had to go back and find out what those memories were in order to cure them. Okay? So the idea is that these memories are locked in they're unconscious. You don't have access to them. And then at some point, perhaps, depending on what sort of retrieval cues are used, you suddenly remember them. Okay? So that's the idea of repression, right? This horribly traumatic event, you're human to deal with it, you repress that memory, and then it may come back. So the idea is in the green, there's an event, there's natural decay of memory or forgetting, or maybe there's some repression, depending on the trauma associated with that event. Then there's some retrieval cues that are used, and then you have a memory for the event. Or on the other side, and this is you can implant memories, there's no event. Right? You never got lost in the shopping mall. There was suggestibility used, right? Misinformation used, and then you have memory for event that never happened. Okay? So the black line reflects the temporal timeline. Okay? So this could argue the upper part talking about recovered memories that are true, and below the black line are false memories. The most famous case involved in what's now being determined to be a false memory is the Eileen Franklin case. So she's 29 years old. She has 2 children, a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old. She's holding the 2-year-old in her hands, and allegedly she's looking at her little 6-year-old in the living room. The sun is shining through the window. Her 6-year-old lifts up a crayon. Okay? Supposedly or allegedly at that very moment, she remembers what she saw when she was 8 years old. All of a sudden, after 20 years of no memory, she has this immediate recall. So this is what she claims. At trial, some other information comes up. Anyway, what she reports that she remembers her best friend Susan Nason being being raped and killed by her father. Okay? So no memory of this event. I mean, she's not that young. She's not like 2 or 3 years old. She's 8 years old. So remembers that her father raped in the back seat of the van, raped her friend, dragged her out of the van, picked up this rock, and smashed the head in of this little girl. Okay? And then he buried the body. She was threatened not to tell anyone. She then claims she repressed that memory, had no inkling that her father did this. And then at age 29, she calls the police and gives them the very detailed account. And they go ahead and arrest her father, George Franklin. So, so George Franklin is arrested, and there's no evidence. I mean, this is 20 years old. A murder that happened 20 years ago. So the only evidence that was presented at trial was Eileen's eyewitness account of that memory. So he's found guilty of first-degree murder in 1990. In 1993, she wrote a book about the case called Sins of the Father. So if you want to read more about her case, she wrote about what happened to her. In 1995, he appealed, and it came out that really what happened, Eileen was feeling depressed and anxious and overwhelmed. She had gone to a therapist. The therapist said, well, those symptoms, there must be something in your childhood that would explain those symptoms you're having. I'm going to hypnotize you. If I hypnotize you and use age regression, you may remember something that happened in your childhood, right, that would explain why you're having so many difficulties today. So this therapist hypnotized Eileen, and it was during the hypnosis. It was not at home, but she claimed initially, when she saw a little kid, it was during hypnosis in the 3rd session that she disclosed this murder to the therapist. So it was overturned. There was simply not enough evidence. The judge ruled that there was tainted evidence used to convict this man, and so he was released. Certainly, he then turned around and tried to sue the therapist, who he thought helped implant the memory, because the therapist kept saying, oh, there must have been something that happened. There must have been some trauma, or else why would you like? And also tried to sue the expert witness in court who testified at his trial. Neither suit was successful. So he didn't successfully sue either one of them. Okay, so memories of sexual abuse, certainly about the recovered memory debate tends to focus on this area. Most memories of sexual abuse are continuous. Okay, if you were sexually abused as a child or experienced some trauma, typically you try hard to forget it and you remember it right throughout your life. So 90% of sexual abuse victims remember exactly what happened. Some of the details, especially if they're repeatedly abused, may be off, but they remember. Right? Repression, if it occurs, is extremely rare. Delayed disclosure is common. Okay, so it's very, very common that children who are sexually assaulted do not immediately disclose. In some cases, they never disclose. So there's been studies looking at how long it takes a child to disclose. 83% of boys who are raped or sodomized have delayed disclosure. They are not going to admit they were sexually assaulted. And about 50% of children, female children, do not immediately disclose. Okay? I mean, they don't disclose because A, they're embarrassed. They've been threatened not to tell anyone. If it's by their parent or mother, they're worried that they're going to be removed from the home, that the family is going to be broken up, that they might be taken away. Right? There's a whole host of reasons why children do not disclose. Okay? So it is possible for memories of abuse to have been forgotten, then remembered. So there are examples of this where there's actually medical evidence, right, where the child at age 6 was taken to the hospital and there's medical evidence that she or he was sexually abused. Then they're interviewed 15, 20 years later and they've actually truly forgotten or repressed that memory. How it happens, we're not sure, but certainly it is very rare, but it can happen. And it is clearly possible to implant false memories of abuse. Okay, so there's research looking at case studies. Typically it happens in the therapy session where therapists believe that repression occurs, and therapists believe that in order to cure you or help you deal with your symptoms, we need to go back to the original trauma. And you have all the symptoms consistent with someone who's been sexually abused. Right? Now, you don't remember the sexual abuse, so we're going to spend some time in the therapy session to try and find out why you don't remember you've been sexually abused. Okay? Techniques for interviewing children. There's 4 that's covered in your book. Anatomically detailed dolls have been used to try, again, remember, if you've got a 2 or 3-year-old, right, and you're trying to get this child to report about sexual abuse or other abuse, you may want to use dolls or puppets to make it easier. They talk about the stepwise interview, criterion-based content analysis, and narrative elaboration. Okay, so first of all, for the anatomically detailed dolls, certainly they've been used quite a bit. And the assumption is that if you provide a kid with a doll, and if they're pre-verbal, let's say a 2-year-old, or they're not wanting to talk to you, you give them these dolls, and I've got an example of sort of looks like little Cabbage Patch dolls, but they have all the right parts up there. And then they will act out what happened to them. Okay, that's the idea. Makes it easier for them to act out what happened. Now the problem is, research does not support the assumption that it will make it easier for children to act out what happened than to describe what happened. And the other major problem is there's no standardization. Do you present the dolls dressed or undressed? There's actually 14 companies selling these dolls. They all look somewhat different, right? In some cases, the genitalia are certainly much larger than they should be compared to the size of the doll, right? And you can go on YouTube, and there's this father, I guess he's a mini scientist anyway, he decides he wants to see what happens when he gives his child, a little 2-year-old, 2.5-year-old, one of these dolls. So you can just Google anatomically detailed doll's 2-year-old. And not surprising that he has put a little diaper on this little doll. So the little kid is playing, the dad saying, oh, take the diaper off, right? Finally, after a while, the kid takes the diaper off and is shocked. Because all her other dolls, they don't have anything hanging between their legs. And this little doll, new doll, there's something there. So what does the 2-year-old do? Well, she starts playing with it, right? And you can imagine, and the dad says, oh, don't play with that. No, put the diaper back on, right? I mean, it's like often kids, when they're given these dolls, they'll engage in sex play. It's not all that uncommon, right? So if non-abused kids do this, right, maybe it's going to be hard to distinguish the truly abused kids from the non-abused. You get my... Okay, so Stephen Cece's done work on this area. Parents brought 3-year-old kids to the doctor. 50% of them got a genital exam. So the doctors examine the kids' genitals and touch them. This is a physician, right? Touch them down there. And 50% didn't. Okay. Then they were given these dolls, and the children were asked, did the doctor touch you here? Right? And they pointed down there. And for those kids who actually were touched, 45% of them said yes. I don't know why the rest of them didn't say yes, but anyway, so maybe they were, again, these are 3-year-olds though, right? So about half of them said yes. For the kids who went to the doctor and had, their height was taken, their weight was taken, they were not undressed, the doctor did not touch them down in their genital area, 50% said yes when they were given this doll. So it certainly shows you the potential problems with using these dolls. Okay, the stepwise interview has numerous components, and they're described in your textbook. First, you should have establish rapport with the child, and you should discuss with the child the importance of telling the truth. Right? So if you're doing an assessment or an interview about sexual abuse, you do an assessment of the child's cognitive verbal skills. Right? How do they label different body parts? The last thing you want to do, and I have some examples of police interviews, is for you to provide the child with names that are too advanced, right, for different body parts. So you don't start saying, oh, that is called a penis, and that is called this, because the next time this kid is interviewed, they might have inappropriate language, and then someone will say, oh, this kid probably has been abused. You also want to discuss their ability to describe past events. So you might say, tell me a time, the last time you had a birthday party, and what happened. Right? And you can just check to see how much detail they provide about something in the past. So that gives you a baseline to see how verbal they are, how much details they provide. Then you introduce the topic. You don't say, did your Uncle Sam touch you between the legs? Right? And it's amazing what the police interviews. Police have a suspect. They know who the suspect is. Often they'll start with, you're here because we understand something really bad happened to you. We understand that your uncle did something bad, and we're really sorry that happened to you, and we want to talk to you about it today. Right? You're setting up a scenario where the child's going to say, well, yes, maybe Uncle Sam did something bad to me. Free narrative. You should always do free narrative first. Do not have specific questions. Let the child report everything the child has to report. You might prompt them, did anything else happen? Right? But don't say that, any specific. Then you have general questions, maybe to clarify, did it happen before Christmas or after Christmas? Did it happen before school started or after? So you're going to use events that are salient in the children's life, right, to cue for timing, rather than happen December 24th, 2008. Okay? Then you can ask more specific questions. Then, after you've done all this, And you should videotape these interviews. You can start adding any interview aids, like drawings, puppets, or these dolls. But it's after you get the initial disclosure that you would add these. Udo Undeutsch is a German psychologist who certainly has was very concerned. He was an expert who would testify a lot in child rape cases, and he was really got more and more upset because the juries would not believe the child. So he wanted to develop a technique that would support children's disclosures. He didn't want to question them. He thought, you know, most of these kids who are reporting that they've been sexually assaulted have actually been sexually assaulted. So he felt that statements, so he's going to analyze the content of the statement, would be different if you truly experienced a sexual assault than if you imagined it or someone, let's say a parent, told you that it happened. Right? Makes sense. I mean, if you have a 4-year-old who truly experiences being abused versus a 4-year-old who's been coached to say, Daddy did this to you, right? This is going to be a whole different content of their speech. When might false disclosures of sexual abuse occur? There's the primary example of this is these are children with false allegations are in custody disputes. Okay, you're involved in a custody dispute with your spouse or your partner. You want sole custody. One way you can obtain sole custody is alleged that your husband has sexually abused the kids. Right? Typically, there won't be any physical evidence. It's your word against his word. Right? You tell the children what to say to the social worker. Right? And unfortunately, often the child, which is good, will be initially believed. Okay, in your book it talks about CBCA. This is the technique that Undeutsch developed in Germany. And I'm not going to go through these in detail because I do need to get to 1 or 2 last slides, so because I know what I need to tell you before the end of class today. But anyway, CBC, there certainly will be questions about CBCA on the midterm. In the book it says 18. There's actually 19. There's an error in the book. There's 19 different criteria you'll apply. So what you do is you interview the child, you make a transcript of what the child says, and then you apply these 19 different criteria to see whether the child is truthful or not. So the first 3 are logical structure. Did this happen in a logical manner? So Susan says, I came home from school at 3 o'clock. My dad took me in the bedroom at just after I had my snack, and whatever happened. Okay, that happens in the logical sequence of this little girl's life. That would be supportive, right? That narrative. Unstructured production, so that the story or the narrative sounds unstructured, right? So the child says, this is what's happening. If you ask them to repeat what's happening, it might change to some degree, because not all the memory is perfect. And the more details, more supportive of credible allegations. Okay, so the more details the kid can give you, the more... Now this is an age-related issue too. Little 2- and 3-year-olds can't give as many details as an 8- or 9-year-old. Okay? There's also specific content. There's 10. Right? So each of these are rated. Reproduction or speech. If you're going to do a false allegation, right, your mom's told you to say Dad's done something to you, it's unlikely your mom's going to say, okay, make sure Dad says this and you respond with this. Dad says this, you respond with this. Right? So the kid reproduces speech. Daddy told me not to tell anyone or I'd get in big trouble. And I started to cry. Okay? Daddy had, so that sort of interaction or narrative is supportive. Unexpected complications. We were up in the bedroom. My brother came and knocked on the door when it was happening. Well, how many people who's going to falsify an allegation will think of that unexpected complication, right? Knocking on the door while the act was happening. And you get a little 3-year-old who interprets what's happening. Okay? So accurately reported details misunderstood. Right? The perpetrator has an orgasm. Little kid doesn't know what's happening, thinks he's peeing on the bed. And that's what the little kid reports. Or that he sneezed. Right? So that, again, if you're falsifying, that's very unlikely to have that sort of detail. Okay, and there's these other motivation details. So there's been several studies to look at the accuracy of CBCA. And one's done by this Max Steller. What he did was he got 6 to 9-year-old kids. He told them to tell a true story. It had to be a story that they were involved in, where they felt, upset about. Okay, so it could be a story that they got into a car accident or they saw something happen to a good friend of theirs. And then they were given a false story. Okay, so one of the false stories they were given, when you were 6 years old, Big St. Bernard came up to you and bit you on the neck. And you got really upset. Okay? And so they give them some details, and so the kid has to think of that story, and then they're sat down in front of someone who's blind, and they tell the true story, and they tell the fake story. Okay? And all the stories, the kid was involved. There was some sort of negative emotional arousal, right? Being in a car accident, being attacked by a dog, loss of control. So all of this, both the true and false, had the same components. They were trying to make it mimic, right, child sexual abuse. And then they scored these stories with this criterion analysis, CBCA, and they found that 83% of the true stories were correctly classified as true. So it's easier to classify true stories, which is good. Right? You want to support the finding of truth. And 58% of the other stories were, 58% of the false stories were identified. Okay? Okay, I'm going to just end with this quickly with this. We have a few minutes before we end. This Care Nursery School, the Martinsville case was covered in your book. This is the case, this is the most well-known case in the United States. Margaret Michaels. She was 25 years old. She was 3 credits short of a BA in theater. She decided to take 1 year off of school to make some money so she could come back. Right? This could happen to any of you in your 4th year, so she could come back and finish off her university degree. She came from a large family. They were looking for a daycare. She thought, look, I know how to look after kids, so she volunteered. Well, she went to work at this nursery school. Okay? At the nursery school, one child there, the mom had taken the child to a nurse. The nurse had taken the child's temperature using an anal thermometer, right? And the little boy had said, "That's what my teacher does to me." That one comment started this entire investigation that involved all 45 kids, involved numerous interviews with these kids, involved the most bizarre events. These kids were claiming Margaret was peeing on the piano bench and they were made to lick it up. They were claiming that she made a cake out of feces and made them eat it, that she licked them, and they had sex. One little boy said, yes, she was chopping my pee-pee off, my penis is off. Right? I mean, it was just bizarre. It was just got more and more bizarre. The more these kids got interviewed, the more bizarre it got. Turns out she was actually convicted of 115 counts of sexual abuse. She was sentenced for, this is a person 25 years old, no history of anything like this. She just, sort of your worst nightmare. She spent 5 years in jail, 18 months in solitary confinement because people wanted to kill her because they thought she had abused these little, 3 and 4-year-olds. Right? Finally, it was overturned. 45 North American psychologists wrote to the judge and saying this is absurd, what happened to this woman. So it was overturned in '94. The state decided not to retry. I'll end with this comment by Stephen Ceci. The interviews with children in the Michaels case were some of the worst I've ever heard. The children were undoubtedly abused, but probably not until they met the social workers and the police officers. Okay, thanks a lot.